So do you hear me okay? Yes. If I move too far away from the microphone, please let me know, because I tend to move quite a bit. Anyway, so I'm talking about data publishing from a different perspective. So I work for CERN. CERN is a physics laboratory based on the border of France and Switzerland. So this is here, close to Lake Geneva, very beautiful place. In case you are interested in visiting, I highly recommend it. Drop me an email and we show you where the data is being produced that I am talking about. So what is CERN? CERN is an intergovernmental research organization, pretty big. We are one of the customers of DataCite, so what Laura has been talking about, because we need to serve quite a big group of researchers, physicists. We have more than 12,000 researchers coming to us every day doing their research in our lab, so we are one of the biggest labs in the world. And all of them are from very different nationalities. So we have Israelis and Palestinians, for example, working together on experiments. Pakistan, Israel, Iran, all in the same room, joining the research on this very collaborative experiments that also Laura already mentioned. I like to raise this also in particular in this context because we are touched by all the different data policies that are out there. So Commission, European Commission, NSF, and any kind of Chinese mandates that are emerging, we all have to deal with them. So it's quite a mixed bag. And on top of it, we have lots of data coming in. So I'm talking about, or I've already been talking about CERN, quickly introduce the generic data publishing concepts that we deal with, which works across disciplines. Then I give you the different perspectives coming from our community, high energy physics, the community services that result from that my team offers, and I like to conclude with the role of publishers that we see, because we really need publishers to work with us to get the ball rolling. And yeah, I hope you will have lots of questions towards the end. So Laura has already touched based on some of this, but I wanted to quickly summarize the general data publishing models that we refer to during our work. As said before, I work on the Scientific Information Service at CERN, so my team together with the librarians and software engineers is developing services, and this is what we are referring to. So we refer to standalone data that usually sits in a repository. I'm going to give you some examples in the next slides. Then another concept we deal with is article data linking. Data sites and cross-ref services are playing a major role here. So how to enrich content from the traditional publication to a repository entry and vice versa, because also we as data repository providers are of course interested in learning what articles have been referring to this data set or have been reusing it. And then Laura mentioned it already, data articles and data journals. I put the red wrapper around data because Laura mentioned it. It is an additional documentation, probably peer-reviewed, that comes on top of the data set or data collection, whatever comes first, and in addition can be connected to a traditional article that we have been publishing, or you have been publishing the last 300 years. It should be noted, though, that these are, of course, basic concepts only, but there are various solutions and varieties depending on the discipline you work with. Laura already referred to re3data.org, and I highly recommend looking inside this if you're interested in getting started with data publishing, because here you really can find the repository that you might want to work with. In particular, to address article data linking, so to enrich the articles you are in charge of, for example. I also like to point out that there is a lot of discussion about data journals and software journals. I'm also going to show you some examples in a few seconds, which usually partner with repositories, external repositories, not always, but usually. or for example with GitHub for software journals. So not hosting the content themselves, but linking out again using DOIs, etc. And also there are variations because some journals have their own list of repositories they like to work with. Others just say, okay, we trust repositories following these and these guidelines. So there's also a spectrum of things that could be done. But it's already done, so it's, I would say, reasonable to learn from best practices. That's why we worked in the Research Data Alliance group on data publishing workflows, towards establishing some standards for data publishing. So this is the reference to the report. I didn't want to bore you with the details because, as you can see from the graph, it gets rather into the details. But just to give you an idea of, there is work out there with lessons learned and best practices where you can pick up on. As said before, Laura showed this as well. There is, no one has to reinvent the wheel. I mean, some disciplines do not have data repositories, of course, but many do. Go to re3data.org and check it out. One of the repositories is Zenodo. This is a general purpose repository serving all the disciplines. Started as an orphan repository, so for all the disciplines or researchers who do not have a place to go. It's hosted at CERN, so pretty close to me. It's really already integrated in many publishing workflows as well as software publishing workflows. One of the, I'm just listing a few examples here that I've been in touch with. One of the data journals that is out there touching also sensitive data partially because clinical trial, etc., is Nature Scientific Data. Their data branch from the Nature family, who also have specific peer review processes in place, so they demand the repository to fulfill basic requirements so that they can be incorporated into the publishing process. Another example I like to highlight because it touches sensitive data, for example, privacy-concerned data, is the Harvard Dataverse. So they pay special attention to anonymous data and to allow really also social science researchers to go out and share the data. They also have a plugin for journal integrations with OGS to make sure that researchers do not have to submit in 10 places at the same time once they publish their research. One example launched very recently is a software journal, the open source, for open source software, which is based on GitHub, but has obviously its own interface. DOIs are minted through Zenodo to data site. To give incentive to the researchers and computer engineers to share their code and the documentation in a citable way publicly. And the word incentive will pop up in my presentation throughout because, as Laura also already mentioned, this is the key aspect when it comes to data sharing and open science. In this first part of more general aspects of data publishing, I would like to raise a few considerations for us and for you to work with. When talking about different solutions and what fits best for one particular research community or discipline, it's really important to keep in mind not only discipline-specific aspects, of course, but also what is the purpose of what you are doing. Is it, do we just want to publish stuff? Or do we want to go as part of open science principles, allow future reuse, future reproducibility of research results? I believe that's what we are heading to because, as Laura has been mentioning, this is where mandates are going. This is where also societal expectations are going. They want to see, okay, this is a key result that is discussed in a newspaper. Where can I see? Where has this been published? Where has this been discussed? Oh, can I maybe even look at the code? What have they analyzed? Is the data out there? Can I have a look at that? So these are raising emergent expectations that we have to meet. And this is important to keep in mind on what you offer. Are you going for a more complex scenario or just a basic repository for data sharing where we just dump the Excel spreadsheet and that's it? So I'm going to show you different approaches that we offer in a second. So other considerations are metadata standards. Other existing ones, simple ones like the metadata side one, for example, we stick to it because it's very basic, very easy to fulfill, and then we come with discipline-specific ones afterwards. Or not afterwards, alongside it, sorry. Quality, important thing. Peer review mechanisms are also very important for data. There's little discussion about that yet, but I presume it will be coming. Dependencies, very important for us in high energy physics because all the data we tackle is usually processed with very complex analysis software and statistical methods. Versioning, also very important. It's not just the one basic file. It's usually undergoes lots of processing throughout the research process. Last but not least, referencing and persistent links. I think Laura mentioned it sufficiently already. I mean, how one can do it, but I think it's important to mention that it's really for data, software, publications, all these things to offer incentives to the individual researchers. Are there any questions to this part? Because now I'm moving to the discipline-specific stuff. Okay. There's lots of time afterwards anyway. So how does this matter to high energy physics? Well, I mean, high energy physics is extremely collaborative research domain, as I explained. Lots of effort is going into conducting these experiments, which result in petabytes of data coming in per year. So we have tons of data, extreme complexities, lots of dependencies, lots of versioning, and hundreds of people working on the same thing throughout, under lots of pressure throughout their career. So this is one example. This is just a small fraction of the CMS experiment. Usually there are, in the CMS experiment, 4,000 authors on one paper. These are really the people who sign this. So same is happening for data. So of course not all of them contribute to a data set, but the paradigm in this community is that everyone gets to sign it because everyone put their time and their lives literally into producing this experiment. So this is for us, for example, it's very hard to establish the credit taxonomy for such measures because we have this long tradition of very long author lists. So what do we need for data services on top of the basic examples that I already showed? We need to accommodate collaborative work. This is particular when we offer services for data and progress. We need to accommodate big data because particularly the standard repositories out there only have gigabyte files. We always have terabyte to petabyte. High frequency versioning, and we need to allow flexibility. Our people, it's a very competitive environment. They really need to want to make sure that only them can access this throughout their work. And then afterwards, once it's public, they still want to have the control. They want to make changes or not, etc. So openness when it comes to data is not standard in this discipline. Where many people think so, but it's not, because we might be quite ahead of the game in terms of open access, in terms of open data. We really have to push hard. That's why it's even more so important that researchers are enabled to get credit for any time and investment they make into open science, open data, open code. So I just wanted to briefly show you this. This is the basis of my work in my group. And this is just to illustrate different categories of research data we distinguish. I'm not going to go into the details, just to illustrate that we put lots of thoughts into different categorization to make sure we address them with the right services. There's a paper out there that, in case you're interested in more details. So these are the services we have been developing or are developing for the community. CERN Open Data is on production level and online. It's for standalone big data. We, 3 weeks ago, we shared 320 terabytes of data there with a big release that was very well received in the news media. And we know that the society has quite some interest in this, because many people think, okay, who's going to work with this so specific, etc. No, I have to say our experience is that people are super interested in this. They go and download the virtual machines, access the data, play with it, and come back to us. So just imagine if you link this this is standalone data, but we expect that many publications will come from this. We already know that people, other physicists from labs who have not collaborated yet with the experiments, are already having their hands on this. Next repository is HEP data. This is for more small-scale data. It's data underlying publications. So publications you might be having. I don't know who you are in terms of which publisher. So these are the data sets that are submitted as supplement to these articles. They're not submitted to you yet, but they're submitted to us, and we link to the publications. So this is really concerning the article data links. Then we are building a service called CERN Analysis Preservation, which I'm not showing today, only because it makes things very complex and we only have very limited time. But this should be of interest, I think, as well for the publishing community, because what we allow researchers here is logging into a system and preserving their research, code, data, documentation, peer review, whatever comes as part of the analysis process, which is rather complex and long in this community. In the system, we allow versioning, referencing, internal citations, etc. So, and all this then is, in its final stage, closed up and sent to you, the publishers, where it becomes the traditional publication. So if you were interested in linking to the resources, we could offer you all of this with different versions, etc. So anyway, I'm not going to present it today because it makes things rather complex, and I wanted to stick to the open part because CERN Analysis Preservation is closed. Anyway, INSPIREHEP is the last one, and that's about data citation tracking. So this is the community platform where all the publications, we have publisher suite, we have agreement with publishers, we have archive harvesting, we get all this in, we text mine it, and so we do citation tracking also to the data sets. I'm going to show it to you later. So why do all this concern you? Well, I hope it does, because most of the data, if not all the data we are dealing with in these repositories and services result in traditional publications on your platforms. So we could really help you enriching your content, and we are very interested in learning how our data has been used. So looking into opendata.cern.ch, as said, it's live. Feel free to dig in, play with the data, let us know if something is missing, etc., because we're always interested in feedback. We have an education and research section. As said, 320 terabytes shared 3 weeks ago. This is how it looks like. We have, it's very specific. So my team sits down and with the researchers helps them curating these data sets, establishing standards on top of the data set standards to get the community into the data sharing mood, because as said, we haven't had that. And this is how it looks. One record looks like as a digital library, so I'm talking about records. You see, for example, the site as CMS collaboration, the 4,000 authors, and then the title, etc. So this is the data citation and DOI we get from DataCite. Huge incentive for the community because they're really eager to see how this has been reused and get the incentive for their publication record. One last thing here, we use Creative Commons public domain dedication for our metadata and data. This means everyone can do whatever they want with this data, no liability, etc. We use CC BY for text publications and the free software licensing, so everything is open source and open science supportive. This is the other repository I mentioned. Not so much for big data anymore. Definitely not as complex the data on here. This is really supplementary materials to 8,200 publications, resulting in, well, you can read yourself, data tables. This has been redone. We launched it, it's many, many decades old, but redone very recently. And you see also here the, yeah, you can see it. The data citation, very important for the researcher to get credit, so we really focus on incentivizing the whole process, because you need to get the ball rolling. You also see that this is a paper published in INSPIREHep, and this is the author list, or start of the author list from that publication. It offers a visualization, and you can dig into the data, search for specific keywords and all this sort of thing. On top of the data set, that's a set in addition to
Can I just
sure.
quickly interrupt and ask, that's been harvested from physical
No.
review letters, or that's been submitted by authors?
Neither of the two,
Okay.
because we harvested from our community platform, so Inspire, which is this one, and IPS, we get an APS feed, and then to Inspire, and because Inspire and HEP data sit on the same software, we get it from there.
Okay.
So it might be manually curated afterwards, because all the stuff on Inspire gets manually curated. Okay, as said, incentives, frequent word I use in this presentation, because it's all about making it count. As the uptake, I mean, it sounds as if we have services and people are getting interested, but everything we do in this domain for researchers is on top of a 12-hour working day on the experiment. So you really need to provide some incentives. So what we have been doing is on this community platform, which is really the central tool for all researchers to find the publications and reference lists they need in their everyday life. Also, they like to count their own citations on this platform. It's notoriously known. So this is an author profile we do also based on the text mining I've been mentioning. Our guinea pig is always Kyle Kramer, open science enthusiast, who has been sharing data sets already. You see here a list of data sets, and we list them already. What's missing, and this is work for us in the future, is to implement the data citation counts we have in these counts here on the right. Because, I mean, we count it already, but we don't list it explicitly yet. This will be a paradigm shift that we expect to happen this year, because as, I mean, funders start discussing different career assessments and might hopefully include such counts in the assessments. Anyway, what are our observations? Challenges across disciplines. I mentioned it along the lines. We have an adoption problem. There's lots of extra work for this. It's demanded, yes, the researchers know it. There's lots of policy pressure, but there's extra work. Researchers need to see the benefit. Interoperability. Researchers do not want to submit in 5 different places. I mean, it's obvious. Discoverability. Is anyone actually noticing what I put out there? Because, I mean, you can put it out, but, I mean, if no one finds it, it's pretty useless also. So integrating tools into this Inspire community platform that I mentioned is, for us, a crucial argument to foster adoption. Anyway, reuse. Is anyone actually using it? Data citation can help a lot with it. And sustainability. Can anyone guarantee that it makes a difference if I share it on your platform or just on my random website? And this is where people like me come into play, because we have to reassure them that it actually makes a difference. But we need you. And by we, I mean really teams like me or Laura's team, who, I mean, we are trying to get the ball rolling. We are building services. But when it comes to adoption and giving data visibility, I think there's a crucial role for publishers. We really need to improve the data integration and publishing, give data more visibility, allow data and software to play a role in review and for final publishing, make it even a requirement. Daniela is going to talk about that in a second. Make sure that data citation is taken into account or is done in the reference list. Use DOI for data. Help fostering the adoption. Start discussing with repositories or thinking about community standards in that regard. And maybe even discuss reproducibility of published results. And this is in particular something I personally think, I'm not going to, cannot tell you what to do, but this is just what I see as needs from our side. As you have all the contact with the research community, sit down with your editors, reviewers, and authors and discuss reproducibility and what are the needs in this community, what standards are needed, what quality aspects need to be considered. Since you are work with the community already so closely with editors and the reviewers, I think it might be worthwhile understanding how they can help putting attention to data citation, data sharing, data availability, and then go and use the conduits you have with reviewers to actually draw attention to missing pieces if they are there. Also making sure that if the reviewers, if the authors talk about data, for example, hey, have you considered submitting it to or make it available here, make sure that the link exists to a repository. I can say, I know I talk with authors almost every day, given that they are, the data we get is usually submitted as publications afterwards. They are pretty much lost. I think some of them might even be happy if they get easy guidelines. Just submit here, they help you preparing the data for submission, or if we help you preparing data for submission. Here, you might even get extra citations if you do that. Stuff like this, very easy, but if they not only hear it from me and our teams, but also from the other side, that can make a real difference. Also, as a repository provider, we are very interested in collaborating with publishers. I'm not making this up now because of the presentation, but we're really eager to talk with the publishers. We collaborate with through other means already on the data domain, because we are interested, as said, to see how our data has been used, has it been cited, etc. Services like the DataCite and Crossref event data make it much easier now to see this if data is submitted through these means, the metadata, So you might be interested to benefit from the visualization that I've briefly shown for the HEP data repository, for example, to enrich content on your end, because we really can enable authors, readers, to dig down more into the paper through such means, because we see that we have the data underlying such publications. So that might be something, a win-win situation. So also other considerations are the specific needs in the community. Are there other offerings for data articles or maybe even data journals that should be considered? So I want to conclude with a note on adoption again. For us, it's really the crucial part now. It's a social challenge. I think there are lots of services in many communities, maybe not all, but really the majority of the communities, that can be used to establish this network of objects, of code, data, documentation, articles that Laura has already been referring to, so that it's a very interlinked system to make sure that discovery of research becomes more transparent and hopefully open. We can do our part and help with data preparation, data submission, offer these services, but it would be really nice to give data more visibility and get other entry points for that. I believe publishers have the conduits, the contacts to the research community, possibly even have pressure mechanism to use to push researchers to use such data services and to fulfill requirements that are out there that they need to fulfill eventually over the next years. So we really need you, that's what I'm trying to say, to make publishing, data publishing an intrinsic process for researchers. And yeah, it would be nice if you can join the game, because it's quite fun actually. So that's all I wanted to say. Any questions?
Bill Jones from Digital Science. So there's been a lot of talk over, I think, the past couple of years in publishing circles about data publishing, particularly, I think, more in biological circles, things like physics, science, and one of the things that comes up is the need to shift incentivization amongst research. Now, you spoke a little bit about incentivized data publishing, but if you I'm interested in comparing biology to physics. There's just two very different types of things. And in biology, the issue is that hypothesis-driven research is the bit that you can't get credit for. And making data is something that's almost considered to be a technician's job. It's kind of second tier, if you know what I mean. So data publishing doesn't have it's often said won't have the value that article. So there has to be a shift in incentivization. So is that similar in physics, do you think, or is it a different landscape?
I think it's actually a bit different. It's an interesting aspect to look at, but first of all, ING physics has a different setup. I mean, we have this giant lab where most physicists pass through at least once in their research lifetime. So the centralization happens naturally because they feel connected to CERN somehow. So yeah, there is a centralization, and I think data taking or being close to data taking is and data gathering, and not necessarily yet data publishing, but it might be a step coming, is regarded more positively than what you described. So yeah, but which I think can be based on the different community habits and hierarchies that exist. Because we are a global community, but it happens in very centralized labs, so it's not as diversified as biology is, which obviously you need to do lots of mining to probably get the data that you are interested in. So, which is not the case here, I think.
I would say, in particular for physics, you have two clear communities, really separated. One is theoretical physics and one is applied physics. And all these theoreticians are actually the ones that are reusing what the applied physicists are generating to a certain extent. So data gets more or less generated by one community and reused by another one. So making this difference is also a way of giving different value to what each one of the communities is doing.
Yeah, but still also the theoreticians are more centralized.
Yeah, definitely.
And the products are not as diverse as they are in the biology. So, yeah. We can do a nice PhD research on that, I think. Sorry. More questions?
I have a few.
Of course.
One of the things that you touched on was peer review of data. And so I now am on more of a biological sciences side than I was before, where it was closer to high energy physics. I wonder if you could talk to some of the challenges that you see for peer reviewing data, and what responsibility do publishers have for ensuring that peer review is carried out? One of the things you talked about is counseling reviewers. Well, I think data by its very nature is highly variable.
Exactly,
So
I think that's a big problem.
how as publishers can we effectively counsel reviewers to help facilitate peer review of data when each case can be a discrete case, when each case is unique?
I don't think, to be honest, you can be the decision maker, but I think you can host and facilitate the conversation that needs to happen within the community. Because as you said, it's so diverse. And also at CERN, I think it will be, also of course it depends on documentation and such things. So I think it's more about encouraging authors to provide as much as possible and then enabling communication between authors, reviewers, editors to help throughout the process. But this comes later. I think first the discussion needs to happen in the community. What are standards? And are there standards already? Because one shouldn't reinvent the wheel, but many don't have any standards. So yeah, I think that the discussion needs to happen first. And I think that can nicely be hosted or facilitated by publishers. Yeah, because it needs scholarly societies to be on board, etc. But and it's a complicated process. But I think someone needs to trigger it, and I actually believe publishers have the ideal role to do that.
I have a few more.
Go ahead.
One of the things you talked about was linking to data and making sure that it's hosted in a repository which is appropriate for the type of data. I think Phil's question towards biology having very different needs to high energy physics, or potentially different needs to high energy physics, could point to some of the difficulties there.
That's true.
With a +1 hat on, which has a mandate of publishing all valid research, how do I guide a community that doesn't necessarily have established practices for sharing data? You know, physics might have some repository, biology will have another, medicine, paleontology. What is even the vetting process? There's RE3 data, I suppose, but how do I do that? And then further, publisher's job is about preservation, right? We're here to maintain the scholarly record. And if we're pointing to repositories, how do we validate them? How do we know that a repository is actually going to be there in 10 years' time, 50 years' time,
that's an
150 years' time, and that anyone will even be maintaining that data?
Okay, I'm not, to be honest, I mean, saying that something will be preserved for 150 years. I mean, we can try to, and we try to, but I mean, you know, I mean, I'm not going to live that long also. But anyway, the question is extremely relevant, and I believe there are some standards out there for trusted repositories, as the library community calls them. For example, persistent identifiers should be part of this. Data preservation policy, and things like that. So I think the publishers can have a start, everyone can have a start with these requirements, which probably boil down to 10 high-level points. I mean, it depends on which repository standard you look at, but I mean, the basic high-level things is like probably can be boiled down to 10. And from then, of course, you need to find the right pieces for the individual sub-communities, which I understand is very difficult, because, I mean, for me, as an outsider, it's almost impossible to understand, because we partner with EBI, which is molecular biology, and they have so many data repositories for all the different subtypes, and every time I myself, who comes from from the data domain, looks at thinks she understands something, there's another repository that does something similar. So I understand, but I think, and the researchers are suffering from exactly the same problem, because I mean, they see this forest of repositories, and none of them seems to meet their needs. I think that's a job for people like me to make this easier in collaboration with you. I mean, well, that's what I meant with easy guidelines. Give them a list. If you have this, go there. If you have this, go there. And I think no one can do that alone. I mean, EBI cannot do that alone. We cannot do that alone, because, I mean, we need to guide the researchers together. And as said, build on these basic standards. Most repositories, I mean, ours and EBI's, for example, I mean, fulfill these. So they are pretty easy to choose, and then, I mean, you, to be honest, just need a community discipline expert who says, okay, for that there, easy decision tree. Sorry, I'm a very pragmatic person. And then you have it. I mean, there will be missing pieces for sure, but that's why we have general purpose depositories like Figshare, Digital Science, Zenodo, where the rest can go, and you have the gap closed. I mean, it looks very complex in the beginning, but I think with very pragmatic steps, one can go there very easily. There's a discussion that needs to happen, of course.
And now that funders are required data management plans every time you submit a proposal, many universities and research institutions have started to hire all these like data librarians or data support librarians to help their researchers developing these data management plans. And I guess this more or less centralized effort will rely on these profiles that will be connecting repositories, publishers, researchers to help them put together all these plans.
Yeah. So if you help researchers early onwards for data management plans, you don't have all the burden at the end where everyone is like rushing to get their papers published. So.
So I was wondering if you were framing it more from the perspective of the data helping the metrics of the article that would eventually result in, or if you were thinking about metrics for the data articles themselves, for the data itself, and how that would, because contextually it's different usage, it's a different, item compared to a research article. So I was wondering if there were any expectations for what is successful in terms of metrics for a data article or for a piece of data or a data set.
I think it's too early to say if something is successful or not. I mean, I don't think we are quite there yet. But what I meant is, to be honest, simply listing, okay, this person has published so and so many data sets, and they've been cited so and so many times. Our community is very conservative when it comes to alt metrics and social media uptake, so that will be considered, but I mean, I cannot say that we do that for sure. But so it's, so I was talking about that part. And we have zero uptake on data articles and data journals right now. I have to be I'm very frank. There I'm not going to display anything unless we see something coming up. So it's really about the actual publishing and citation from our repository entries that I was talking about. And the rest I leave to Laura, since you talk more about general metrics.
We haven't really managed to converge when it comes to data citation yet. So I don't think we're even close to start building like actual metrics that will help us tracking all this. And you can see that when you check multiple repositories where they are proposing, for example, different citation recommendations. If you check Data Dryad, this one's proposing you to cite both the publication and the data set, while other, for example, Sunje's repositories are suggesting to cite only the data set.
So that depends on the repository. One only for data, for the standalone, and the other one, the data articles, also both.
Exactly. So even within one community, you see different practices. So the moment you start trying to build metrics and to start counting all these citations, you're expecting your researchers to be following like relatively similar patterns, but those are not yet. Those are not yet in place. So one of the things we've been doing at DataSide, and I think I mentioned that before, is we're working with Crossref to build this event data service that is tracking connections between publications and data sets through the metadata information of each one of them. So the plan is to start serving all these connections as raw data and allowing each one of our integrators, say publishers or say repositories or say different service providers, to build their own metrics or to start modeling this kind of metrics. And our plan, at least at DataSide, is that by the end of this year or beginning of next year, we would like to start using this event feed to start building, I was going to say, not really metrics, but just serving a few ideas on the ways you could start counting these connections. To provide some models and some ideas to the community, but it will be up to each one of the publishers and the funders to decide which kind of connections are more important and how they want to count them.
I think that also touches, interestingly enough, on, Sunje, you were talking about incentivization and how do you incentivize people to actually provide the data and to properly cite it, and without having significant ways of tracking metrics, what is the incentive? Is it altruism alone? Because I think a lot of researchers fear, and Danielle, I think you're going to talk a little bit about this, but I think a lot of researchers fear exposing their own data before they've had a chance to fully mine it and then being scooped for that. And is there any way for them to avoid that? So I think it's an interesting problem to have. I think that in its nascent stages, maybe one of the best things that we as publishers can do is simply acknowledge where data has been used, and almost maybe in some ways, like we see citation networks where there's the primary paper that spawns 40 or 50 different papers, that we have ways of looking at data, for example, and saying how that has influenced those generations of research and scholarship moving forward. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I think it's all about incentivizing this. And as I said, publishers can play a nice role in this.
So for the incentivizing, you said that INSPIREHEP shows individual profiles. I have to feel that's pretty limited to HEP, though. So
Yeah,
how do you deal with researchers that, for example, are doing high energy work, but perhaps with chemistry?
For that we have ORCIDs and an ORCID integration, and so we invite them to connect their profile, the INSPIRE profile to ORCID, and then we integrate these publications they have on their ORCID.
Okay, so it's more of a landing page for not just of what's in INSPIREHEP, but you also pull in from ORCID or other sites?
Only ORCID right now, yes. Okay. Because, I mean, it's a community platform. We only have agreements with HEP publishers, so it is community specific. So.
Okay.
More questions?
Hi, I'm Deb from Salon. Laura, you mentioned that about 25% of funding agencies now require. What do they do? Relevant to the incentives, what do they do to make sure it's just verified?
Not much.
Yeah, because I mean, obviously it's going to affect your ability to get money. That's why it's not.
Yeah. Most of these policies are not enforced yet because they don't even know how. So they start requiring their researchers to develop these plans and to deposit their data, but no one's checking if they're really doing it or not after. But I guess, or I hope this will come soon, the moment they have the means to start following all this.
If I'm allowed a small comment, I just put up the author page again. So, because we know that some funders, I mean, they are looking into integrating this into, as Laura said, into their assessment. So, I mean, have a stick and the carrot at the same time. And for example, we know that some use our author pages for assessment, for career assessment, for funding assessment. So they consider it then implicitly if we offer it to them. And we know that they are discussing it. So, I mean, we're kind of moving, I think that both sides are moving towards the same goal there, which is a long way ahead. But
there are a few interesting models. Portugal has a pretty interesting one. And what they're doing is they're using ORCID IDs for this. So when you're submitting a proposal for funding or when you're getting evaluated, all they will request from you is your ORCID ID. And what they do is they check your ORCID profile and the DOIs that have been connected to that one. So in this way, if you've published, you will get a DOI from Crossref, and if this data is actually deposited, you will have DOIs from data side to check that those actually exist. So it's a way to make use of all these resources to generate like a centralized and relatively easy way to track things.
Do you see a way forward for DataCite, for example, to export out information about what funders have funded which data sources and then try and help them with that I don't want to say the stick because I don't necessarily want it to be a stick, but with that validation to ensure that they're meeting their own objectives? So
all the metadata submitted to DataCite is CC0, freely available. And our API is completely open. So all this information is already there. So if you're interested and you want to harvest it, it's completely free and supported. So it's already there.
Phil?
I just wanted to add to that discussion about what funders do. Most funders, many funders are now requiring data management plans from all. And as Pam said, most of those aren't being enforced. EPSA now in the UK, I think is probably the first funder which has actually said that if you don't satisfy your data management plan, they're going to check, they're going to start delaying funding, you can start refusing funding. So I think this is going to be a similar pattern to the open access mandates, when the NIH, for example, went from just saying that you had to make things open access after a year to actually stopping funding and delaying funding. The amount of compliance, I think, something like quadruples overnight rapidly. So I think that's where we are.
Yeah, along those lines, I think I saw a presentation not too long ago that said uptake for depositing of NIH-funded material into PubMed went well over 90% once they did start checking and circling back. So I imagine if there's a framework in place that allows funders to assess whether that data management plan has truly been fulfilled, then you could imagine a higher adoption. So that was another question for me. How do we ease the burden for authors? How do we give them not just the incentive, how do we give them the carrot that says, we don't want to make this as hard as possible? Because, I am a publisher, so I hear the pain of a lot of our communities trying to submit their article alone, just trying to navigate through our submission system or any other submission system, or having to shop around from 5 or 6 different journals before they're published, and meeting varying requirements across all of those journals for making their data available. How do you ensure that you haven't just drawn an author mad by having disparate data submission policies and requirements?
Well, I guess everyone could comment on that, but I think it's partially the keywords are collaboration and pragmatism. Because, as I said before, researchers on top of that 12-hour workday don't want to submit in 5 different places. Yeah. So if you, for example, I would be very interested if publishers would, when people submit their manuscript, have a link here and submit your data, automated redirect, autocomplete of submission interface, things like that. This makes it very easy. We already have the metadata then coming in, you possibly as well. So stuff like this can make life much, much easier. So that's, I guess, a practical part. And then if you make the guidelines pragmatic and easy as discussed before, that's if this autocomplete functionalities, etc., don't work, because it will not work for all the repositories. I think that's, you can reduce the burden. The burden will never be 0. That's, I think, far too optimistic. If you just submit to Figshare and Zenodo, for example, it's very quick, but I'm sorry, it's also dirty. The metadata is very rough. If you talk about future reuse and reproducibility, it's very limited in such cases. So the time might be lower, more limited that you invest, but the outcome is also limited. And so I think on that side, one needs to compensate and advertise the incentives again. So, I don't know.
Yeah, no, definitely. Lately, we think our researchers are computer scientists, as they can write software. They're librarians, as they can write their data management plans. They're economists, because they know which funding agency works best for them, which is becoming terrible. One of the things we've been trying to build through this thought project I was commenting about before is these connections between publishing workflows and the repository supporting them. So if we manage to build what Sunje was mentioning before, this direct submission, when at the same time when you're uploading your PDF to your publisher, you submit your data and the publisher is already agreeing with, say, Dryads and other Figshare or the service they're using, they can send this information directly there. Reuse the metadata they already gathered for the publication and connect both things at the same time. We're, not only saving time for ourselves, but also for our researchers.
Can I ask a question to the audience? Can you raise your hand if you have considered such, links to submission workflows to repositories? Or, yeah, okay, one. Okay, that's more than I thought. Okay, that's pretty cool.
But I would also ask everyone who just raised their hand and said they were considering that, how many of you have thought about how difficult it would be to coordinate with N number of repositories, where N describes your portfolio, and how many development resources you have to do that? Not trying to be Debbie Downer here. But I think it's really a challenge. I think, Sunje, you brought up a really good point. It's that if you make the entry bar relatively low to get the data, you oftentimes then minimize the reuse of the data. And so perhaps what we have to think about is how to refine that data. So make the entry point low for the author, But if there is a community, for example, that sees value in that data, that perhaps you can look on community to incrementally and perhaps even slowly sort of enrich the metadata that you have about it, or even by machine knowing what other types of papers out there are using this material, be able to describe it more fully. But I do worry, for example, that I'm going to connect n number of data sources in a submission pipeline at a not insignificant cost, and by doing so, not really gain much benefit as a publisher. And whereas I appreciate the value to the community, it's also, I've got to keep the lights on, and it's important to do that.
Yeah, that's certainly true.
Yeah.
I guess that underlines the importance of very generic databases like Dryad, where you can put data from very wide range of fields.
There's also considerations about sustainability. One nice example is Zenodo. CERN is hosting Zenodo, which is hosting data for every possible community. So CERN's very nice right now, but may not be that nice in 10 years when they have like such an amount of data sets they cannot even handle them, or they cannot even pay for the service, right?
Yeah, I actually wanted to, because you're worried about the investment and, I mean, time, money, whatsoever. I mean, don't forget that, I mean, people like me are also out there. I mean, and for example, I think it was mentioned that the UK has data policies out there, so with mandate, I mean, data sharing, etc. Many UK universities now have data administrators, whatever the name, this job description is called. In the end, it doesn't matter. So there are go-to places where they get help or could get help if they know. But most people don't know, of course. That's the problem. But so the burden is not only in you or on the author, but there are emerging go-to places that can help. I mean, they are for sure not established and known, but I mean, I think it's growing into something. I don't know. I mean, don't want to sound self-advertising, but I mean, in the end, yeah.
If you're offering to solve all of our problems, we'll take it.
No.
Are there any more questions? Okay, great. Well, we are at our break time, or just about at our break time, so afterwards we'll come back. We'll have another presentation and some more times for questions. Thank you very much.